Sup, ballers? We are here to do an MLB tier list because when you really think about it, not all teams are created equal. Which teams are supreme over the other? We're going to find out today when we go through these 30 teams, whenever we rank them one above another. And first up, we've got the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. And I don't care if they're called the Los Angeles Angels or whatever, hell, I'm going to call them the Anaheim Angels. And here's just my personal take at this point. It does not matter at any point in their history what they've done. If you look at what they've done in recent history, it all washes it all away. They killed Tyler Skaggs. They killed Mike Trout's career. They're about to kill Shohei Ohtani's career. They are one of the most inept teams in the MLB, and they spend so much money to basically do absolutely nothing every year. Beyond that, their stadium is a joke. There's a homeless encampment that's circling around it all the time. I actually used to live like 2 miles away from this stadium and saw it every day whenever I would drive by it. At this point, I have to put the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim into a C tier, although I think that's being extremely generous because of Tyler Skaggs. Next up, we've got the Houston Astros, and I want to hear nothing about people hitting trash cans with baseball bats. We're not going to talk about that here. What we will talk about is the fact that up until recently, they were a mediocre team at best. They had some notable players, including Nolan Ryan, play for them, but other than that, really, it's only until recently they started being really good. The fact of the matter is, though, they are now a dynasty. Regardless if you like them or not, regardless if you think they cheated or not, they have won multiple World Series rings, and I think you've got to give them the respect that they deserve now. And for that reason, you do got to put them in the B tier. Next up is the Oakland Athletics, and we have seen so many players come out of their farm system to go on to long careers with other teams. Basically, what you've got with Oakland is Billy Beane, and that's it right now. That's it. You got Billy Beane, and everybody else is left. But they've won some World Series in their time. They've definitely made their voices known as far as how to make baseball decisions with Moneyball. But will they remain in Oakland? That remains to be seen because they are trying to relocate themselves to the Bayfront in the new stadium, and they have received resistance from Alameda County so much since they started this process, and it looks like they may end up having to relocate altogether. You can't rate a team very highly if their future is uncertain, so I think with that in mind, you have to put them right above the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim in the C tier. Next up is the Toronto Blue Jays, and I got not much to say about them because there's not much to say about them. Yeah, they've won a couple of World Series in their time, but that's been so long ago, frankly, I don't think it matters anymore. As a matter of interest, I actually know a former player for the Toronto Blue Jays, Willie Upshaw. He's from my hometown of Blanco, Texas. But beyond that, I have no personal connection to the Toronto Blue Jays, and I don't think really outside Canada many people do. Now, Canadians surely love Toronto, and I can't blame them. Obviously, that's their only baseball team right now. They're going to be dead fast for them. But at the same time, what have they done here lately other than just provide misery for their fan base? I mean, the most that they've done has been in a couple of playoff series, and that's it. So for that reason, I have to put Toronto in a mid-C tier. Next up, we have the Atlanta Braves, and finally we have a team that has a storied history and one that I have a personal connection to. I mean, I watched the Braves pretty much consistently whenever I grew up. I remember seeing Greg Maddux on the bump all the time growing up. And finally, the Braves are doing stuff again here in recent years. It's so nice to see. I think you just have to give it to the Braves staff altogether. And so for that reason, I got to give the Atlanta Braves an A tier. Next up is the Milwaukee Brewers, and a team that has never won the World Series, not even one time. For that reason, we cannot rate this team very highly, just in principle. But let's consider this. It's in Milwaukee. What is there to do in Milwaukee? Drink. That's pretty much it. Drink and watch baseball. That's it. I think for what you get, considering the fan base that you have there, they have consistently put on, at least in recent years, a pretty good show. They have not completely shit the bed in recent years, although in the past they have been known to be a pretty mediocre team. But they have Bob Uecker. And Bob Uecker will go a long way in making me want to put them up a little bit on this tier list, right? And just because of Bob Uecker, we're going to go ahead and give him a little bit of credit. We're going to put them in the B tier because goddamn, Miller Park. Gotta love it. Next up is the St. Louis Cardinals, and I cannot even count the number of World Series that this team has won in their storied history. I'm a little pissed at them because they took Nolan Arenado from my team, but there's nothing I can really do about that. The Rockies suck. But the St. Louis Cardinals have had so many good players in their storied history, whether you be talking about Yadier Molina in recent history to Mark McGwire in not so recent history, you could just keep going back. And for those reasons, I have to give the St. Louis Cardinals an S tier because they have managed to stay relevant for so long in comparison to their counterparts. Next up is the Chicago Cubs, and this was one of my favorite teams whenever I was growing up because they consistently lost. What can I say? I'm a sucker for really shitty teams. I also really like Sammy Sosa. That was really my guy until I found out he was a big old cheater. And the 2016 World Series was absolutely epic for anybody that watched it. But they sucked for so long, and they are now sucking again, and it remains to be seen for how long. So despite those little glimpses of brilliance in which we just love to see them shine, they really haven't given us a lot to love, and their fan base has been absolutely miserable for decades, for generations even. And so for that reason, I have to give the Chicago Cubs a high C tier. Next up is the Arizona Diamondbacks, and there's not a lot to say about the Arizona Diamondbacks. They won a World Series, they had Randy Johnson, they also had Curt Schilling, and he is a complete fucking asshole. But beyond that, the Arizona Diamondbacks really have done nothing, and they really don't have a lot to talk about. You can consistently expect them to float somewhere just right under 500 every year. They've never changed their logo as far as I know, maybe just tweak the colors and that's about it. There's nothing exciting about this team. Their ballpark is meh, okay. Honestly, this is a team I think the MLB could just do without. If you want to just get rid of teams, this is one you could just simply cut and nobody would miss. And for that reason, this is our first D-tier team. Next up is the Dodgers, and we have an absolute juggernaut right now. Consistently, every year, the Dodgers are on top of the NL West. Now, can they win a World Series outside of a pandemic? Apparently not. The last time they won one was in 1989. They've been really good. Consistently, every season, they have managed to come through and beat the ever-loving shit out of their division. But despite spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, you would think they would get more success out of those Bucks, and they just flounder in the playoffs seemingly every year. And for that reason, they don't get an S tier, they get a low A tier. Next up is the San Francisco Giants, and I would argue that they have the most beautiful ballpark in all of MLB. McCovey Cove is one of the most treasured icons in baseball. Imagine hitting your home run into a body of water. Now, I will say, as a Rockies fan, I don't like the Giants, and I hope that we beat the ever-loving shit out of them every time that we see them, but it doesn't always happen that way. That being said, they've had some very respectable names in their history. We're not going to talk about Barry Bonds because that guy's a cheat. But Madison Bumgarner, one of my favorite pitchers of all time, came from the Giants organization. So did Tim Lincecum. Bruce Bochy is one of the best coaches, in my opinion, throughout the entirety of that time period. So for that reason, I give the Giants a high A. I put them even above the Braves. Next up is the Cleveland Guardians, who only recently changed their name to the Guardians, and I had to retake this part because I kept calling them the Indians, because that's all I knew them by for my entire life. But beyond that, what can I say about this team other than they just simply cannot catch a break? They had multiple opportunities in the 90s to win a World Series and could not do it. They had 2016 to win a World Series and could not do it. This team may never win a World Series again. Some of my favorite players have been from the Cleveland Indians organization. For example, Corey Kluber in his prime, absolutely one of my favorite pitchers of all time. Terry Francona, one of my favorite managers, if for no other reason, his personality. But this team is mediocre at best, and they often come from an absolutely terrible division, which means that they have such a good record going into the playoffs, but then are immediately swept out. So for that reason, I give the Cleveland Indians a mid-C tier. It's the Cleveland Guardians! No! Next up is the Seattle Mariners, another team to never win a World Series and perhaps never will. Some of the most noted players of all time have come from the Seattle Mariners. For example, Ken Griffey Jr., Alex Rodriguez, Ichiro Suzuki. But at no point have they even sniffed a World Series. They are perhaps one of the most beloved teams in America. If you ask people what their opinions are of the Seattle Mariners, nobody's going to hate them. Why? Because they pose no threat to any team in America. They are always going to be people's number 2 team. If they see them in the playoffs, oh, I'm going to root for fucking Seattle. I had no idea that they were good this year. But alas, we have yet another C-tier team. The Miami Marlins. They used to be the Florida Marlins, now they're Miami Marlins. They had Derek Jeter, now they don't have Derek Jeter. They won a couple World Series completely by accident. They suck every other year. This team is just confusing to me. I know they won 2 World Series, but that doesn't mean that you mean anything to me whatsoever. You are getting a D tier. The New York Mets. Fuck the Mets. Let me explain to you why the Mets suck, okay? The Mets have all the resources in the world to make a good team. They are a big market team. They have the money at their disposal. They can attract any player that they want because of those resources. But perpetually every year, they disappoint their fan base time and time and time again. I'm not even a Mets fan and I feel bad for Mets fans. You could choose to be a fan of any other team, but you stick by a team that you know is just going to disappoint you like that over and over and over again. I don't even get that as a Rockies fan, okay? Because we know our team's gonna suck every year. We don't have false hope like you guys do. I don't know what Kool-Aid they be giving you, but whatever it is fucked up Kool-Aid. Fuck the Mets. You are the worst team in MLB. Fuck you. Next up, we have the Washington Nationals, and they have won exactly 1 World Series in their lifetime of being a baseball team. That's it. They've had some noted players come up through their system like Bryce Harper and Juan Soto. And let's not forget that they were formerly the Montreal Expos. So there is some history there. But I want to tell you the biggest gripe I have about the Washington Nationals is simply the fan experience when you go to a baseball game there. There's nothing there. Yeah, you have the baseball game, but the stadium itself is so sterile I feel like I'm at a dentist's office. There's no amusement there beyond just the game itself. The concessions are bland at best. And the neighborhood surrounding the stadium is all relatively new housing developments, but there's nothing there to enjoy after or before the game. Beyond that, the Washington Nationals consistently seem to suck whenever they're not in the World Series, and that was one time. So for that, I'm going to give them a mid-C tier. The Baltimore Orioles. This is a team I would love to like, but I can't because they suck. That is the end of it right there. I cannot stress to you just how badly the Orioles have sucked in their lifetime. Sure, they do have some World Series in their history, but that has been so long ago at this point, it's almost as if it didn't happen. And let's not forget about Buck Showalter putting in Ubaldo Jimenez in the fucking playoffs and how that ended. That being said, there are some promising signs for the Baltimore Orioles in recent years. This last season, they did manage to play their hearts out and were above 500 for a good part of the season. Hell, they were even playoff contenders all the way up until September. So there is hope for the Orioles, but until they get their shit together, Orioles, you are going to get a high D tier because you, frankly, are just disappointing in every aspect. Except your stadium. Camden Yards is a treasure. The San Diego Padres. This is a team that I have seen play time and time and time again to the Rockies and lose, and I love it every single time. Now, they're doing really, really well here in recent years with all of their farm system acquisitions now in the major leagues, with all the trades that they've made, the free agent signings. But let's not forget, until all of this stuff happened, they sucked for years. If there was an F tier available, I would put this team there because this team has still never won a World Series. To be fair, one of my favorite players did play for the San Diego Padres at one point in Steve Garvey, but that doesn't really mean a whole lot. But because of their perpetual lifetime of losing, despite recent successes, I give the San Diego Padres a low C tier. The Philadelphia Phillies have a storied history, have multiple World Series wins in their history, and they had Jonathan Papelbon, one of my favorite players of all time. They do have a bit of a racist history, but what team that was around back in Jackie Robinson's day didn't have that kind of history, right? Hell, the Braves still have the tomahawk chop, so, I mean, can't really say much even today. That being said, they came awfully close to a World Series victory this last year, and I feel like they have much more to offer in years to come if they just play their cards right. So because of their previous success and because of what looks like will be future success moving forward, I'm giving the Phillies a mid-B tier, one of the few we're handing out tonight. Next up is the Pittsburgh Pirates, and they suck. There's just no dancing around it. They suck. They absolutely suck. They've sucked for a long time. They've had a little bit of success in their history, but that's it. They've mostly sucked in their lifetime. I mean, Pittsburgh really is more of a football town anyway, so granted, it's not really that surprising that they're not putting all of their effort into revitalizing the baseball team, despite having one of the more beautiful stadiums in the MLB. But Pittsburgh, you are going into the mid-D tier because you just have nothing to offer anybody at this point. The Texas Rangers. I grew up in Texas. I got to see a lot of Texas Rangers baseball. Do you know how much of it I actually enjoyed? Not a lot of it. And then George Bush ran the fucking Rangers for a while. I don't know if he owned it or managed it or what. I never fully understood that relationship dynamic. And then they went to the World Series twice and lost both times. And let's not forget David Clyde, the high schooler that they brought up immediately to the major leagues and had his career completely ruined from the start because they didn't prep him for the major leagues and the minor leagues like you're supposed to. Let's not forget that they're currently shaking up their front office as we speak because they have no direction whatsoever. So Texas, until you get your shit together, you are going into a high D tier. Next up is the Tampa Bay Rays, and this is possibly the cheapest team in the major leagues. Despite that, they have been very successful, especially in recent years, bringing up young talent from their minor leagues and developing them into really good major league assets. In addition to, they are able to scout the major leagues and find basically flawed players from other teams and utilize their skill sets on their team to fit their needs. They were also one of the teams the first to utilize the opener role in pitching. So for their innovative outlook and their techniques on how they go through their baseball operations, I'm giving the Tampa Bay Rays a low B tier. Next up is the Boston Red Sox, and despite me being a former Bostonian, I honestly don't really care for this team all that much. That being said, they are one of the oldest teams in Major League Baseball. They have multiple World Series wins under their belt despite a long-ass drought. And even though the current GM Chaim Bloom is making some very confusing moves for some people to understand, they have still many more assets in their farm system that we can look forward to in future years. Their fan experience is one that is rivaled by almost no one in major leagues. Their ballpark is a piece of history in America. Honestly, this is one of the baseball teams that you have to see play at home. There is a piece of America right there in Boston that you have to check out at least once in your lifetime. And for those reasons, I give the Boston Red Sox a low A tier. Next up is the Cincinnati Reds, and other than Pete Rose, what is there to say about this team? Not much. That's pretty much the end of the story with the Cincinnati Reds. They pretty much have done nothing. We're not going to talk about Marge Schott because you can't help who owns some team sometimes. I'm a Rockies fan. We got Dick Monfort. We'd love to get rid of that guy. But the Cincinnati Reds have done very little. They are doing very little right now, and it doesn't look like they're going to be doing much in the future. And so for that reason, we have another mid-D tier team. At last, we get to my team, the Colorado Rockies. And I have to be brutally honest about my favorite team. They suck. Name one player on that team. You can't do it, can you? You didn't even know that Chris Bryant was on that team because nobody knows who Chris Bryant is anymore. He's perpetually injured. You didn't know Charlie Blackmon was on that team because Charlie Blackmon's old now. Other than those two people, you had no idea anybody else on that team was ever a person. I mean, we're playing Chris Bryant in left field for crying out loud. What the fuck is wrong with them? We've made it to the World Series one time, and we got swept by the Boston Red Sox in 2007. We shouldn't even been there. The Rockies are sadly a D-level team, just one shade above the Pittsburgh Pirates. Why above the Pittsburgh Pirates? Because Coors Field is a treasure, that's why. Next up is the Kansas City Royals, and this is a team that I can give some respect to because they've been around for so long, despite them being a small market team and perpetually never winning anything. Yes, they have a couple of World Series under their belts, and yes, they did beat the Mets, which makes me very, very happy for them. But other than that, they perpetually suck just about every year. Their stadium is old, and despite it being relatively classic in style, probably needs to be renovated again or needs to be replaced overall. I will give them credit, they've stuck around rather than relocating, which is more than you can say about the Oakland Athletics, but potentially. So for that, I will give them a high C tier, one above the Cleveland Guardians. I got that name right this time. The Detroit Tigers, and let's just give a moment and think about how hard it has to be any sports team in Detroit, Michigan, because it's in Detroit, Michigan. And yeah, the Detroit Tigers currently suck, and they haven't really been good in a long time. But they've had a lot of good players that have come through at some point, and Miguel Cabrera is a national treasure. But we have to be fair and realize that this team is just not going to go anywhere anytime soon, and hasn't been going anywhere in recent years. And so we're going to go ahead and give this a C tier. Sorry guys, I know it's hard being in Detroit. Next up is the Minnesota Twins, and the Twins, what is with teams that just suck every year? And how many playoff games in a row have the Twins lost at this point? One of my favorite players of all time came from the Minnesota Twins organization in Lou Ford, who I guarantee you've never heard of. So I have some attachment to this team. But that being said, the Minnesota Twins, another C tier team. The Chicago White Sox. Now they have sucked for some time, but they have been good in years past. And I used to watch them all the time in the 90s whenever I was a kid. They have had some really good pitchers that have played for them. Their ballpark has gone through so many names: Comiskey Field, US Cellular. I don't even know what it's named now. But it's like the little cousin to the Chicago Cubs. And the Chicago teams just simply don't seem to have the best runs of luck. I will, however, say I do believe that when you put apples to oranges here, that the Chicago White Sox do come ahead of the Cubs. We give them right above the Chicago Cubs on the tier list. They are going to get a high C tier. Lastly is the New York Yankees, and you'd think automatically they're going to get an S tier, right? Because they have the most World Series wins, they have the most money, they have the most players, blah, 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 right? You're right. New York Yankees, obviously going to be the best team. That's the end. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll be doing more of these tier lists, maybe if you watch this one. I'll see you next time.